I don't know if you get a chance to spend a lot of time at farmers markets over there in lovely Los Angeles, but we've got some real nice ones over here in Philadelphia. And you can get all kinds of things from, fresh organic produce, the good brown eggs.
Sure,
we got the egg lady that we go down and see, and all kinds of neat stuff. But down at the Head House Market, there's once a month or so, there's the knife sharpener.
Okay, yeah.
And he comes down, and he's an older. He's right out of Central Casting. He's literally like, when you hear the word wizened, he's a wizened.
Would you describe the skin as leathery?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Is one eye closed a little bit more than the other, and he like a sea captain,
squinty. And he's kind of hunched over a little bit.
Sure.
And he's got a knife. What he does is you drop off your knives, and he sharpens them. And he sharpens the hell out of them. He does not do a halfway job. And so my wife says, "Oh, we've got to bring our knives because the knife sharpener is going to be there." So it's like, all right, we went down there and dropped him off. And there was a guy down at the end that had smoked. He had a smoker, and he was selling like pulled pork sandwiches and mac and cheese and all this stuff. So it's like, while we were there, I went down and got some pulled pork, and we sat out in the sunshine, and because it takes a half an hour, so we were doing our other shopping and
sure, you get a couple plums, you get a pulled pork sandwich.
Of course.
Sure.
You get the good pears. I grossed the lady out at the fruit market because I get these pears, these beautiful hard green pears, and she says, "Oh, how long does it take for them to ripen for you?" And I go, "Ripe them? These are when they're good. I don't let them get soft and mushy. These are when they're the good." She says, "You don't let them ripen?" I said, "No." Every time I come back now, she looks at me askance because I'm going to eat her precious pears.
Because you're the man that eats pears like an apple. You're like, "Oh, I want them crunchy. I want them
crunchy and tart." But anyway, finally we get back to the knife sharpener. And you ever know, especially an old guy, they've got a couple of lines that they've
and they use it all
over
the time.
Years,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And he gets this glint in his eye, and I know he's going to hit me with one of his tried and true lines. He looks at my wife, hands her the knife, and then looks at me, and he says, "Don't worry, you're not going to feel a thing." Now listen, my wife and I have been married for over 25 years. We've been together for longer than that. She is my perfect person. When she walks in the room, my heart beats faster. But in this moment, I fell in love with her even a little bit more, if that could be possible. Because he says to me, "Don't worry, you're not going to feel a thing." And without missing a beat, my wife says, "My first husband didn't." I love that woman. You know what? It doesn't, all that other, you can be a great cook, you can be a great kisser, but you deliver a punchline like that, and I am a puppy dog in your hands for the rest of your life.
That is fantastic. And also, I have to tell you, because I have somebody similar in my life where the supermarket near my house that I bike to all the time, for some reason, they employ a security guard. Is fine, but like a lot of places, the security guard is 104 years old, which always defeats the purpose of having a security guard.
Yeah.
But like a lot of old guys, he's got like your knife guy. He's got the 3 lines that he uses, right?
Yeah.
But I always say hi to him. I always say, "Hey, Harold, how are you doing?" And we chat for a second. And anyway, he's got his 3 lines. And if you want to throw an old guy like that completely for a curve, what you do is you use their lines on them before they can use them, Brad, and they don't know what to do. They're like, where do I go from here? This is the one line I use for everybody that walks into the supermarket. And so, anyway, what you got to do is the next time you get your knife sharpened, use that same joke on him and just see, like, "Oh my God, I don't even know where to go from here. This is all I got was that one line. That's all I got." And on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to Comic Lab, the show about, I guess, stabbing your spouse and making comics.
And it didn't take too long before there was a bandage over my thumb and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I am his pal Dave Keller, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/Comic Lab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, but more than anything else, let's fire up that third mic because everybody, we have a super delightful guest on the show for you, Jason Chatfield, one of our favorite cartoonists and people in the world. So before we do anything else, Brad, let's warm up that third mic and welcome him on the show.
Hey, everybody. I am so excited about today's guest. It is the former NCS president. We met him just a few months ago at the Reuben Awards week, and we had so much fun talking to him that we decided to spend an entire day talking all things comics. It's our good friend, Jason Chatfield, New Yorker cartoonist. Jason, welcome.
Hey, how you doing, Brad? Hey, Dave. Good to be back.
Hello, my friend.
I've got so many things I want to talk to you about. Jason is somebody I've been following your lead very, very closely as I've been moving a lot of my stuff over to Substack.
Sure.
As a matter of fact, I said a few episodes ago, I think that you're a kind of a thought leader for comics on Substack. I'm watching what you're doing very, very closely. So we're going to pick your brain about what's going on in Substack. Mm-hmm. Of course, I want to talk about your work at the New Yorker. You've got a podcast that I absolutely love called Is There Something in This? Which, by the way, is so Dave and I for ProTips have a show where we try to do something very similarly. It was one of those great minds think alike type of thing where we try to work our way through a joke pitch and then refining it and so when I heard you and your podcast partner talking basically the same sort of thing, but I got to tell you, you guys do it so much better. I will just say right off the bat, because you're also conversational, you're kind of shooting the breeze as you're doing this, and you're both, I will say, and Dave can confirm when it comes to podcasts, I don't give compliments very lightly. You both are really, really good at
Coming
this.
from you, it's very high praise. Thank you.
I will say this. I think it is the only podcast that Brad Geiger has ever recommended to me. I think that is the case.
That very well, no exaggeration, that may be true.
I mean, I've been listening to you guys since I think 2009, maybe 8, something. It's a while back. Yeah. I've been listening because I used to look for cartoon podcasts because I was living in Australia and I didn't have any sort of information on like the comics industry at large, and there weren't that many people doing pods on it. It was crazy. There was like 3 maybe. And I think it was like Tom and you guys and like a couple other just kind of sometimes people just kind of getting together and talking shop, but it wasn't really. It was something because when I find a topic I love, I just double down and just dig in, drill in. And so that's what our pod is. That's what the pod is. There's something in this is just me and my writing partner, Scott. We do that every Monday at a pub in New York. And so he just said one day, hey, not to sound too much like a cliche, but this would make a pretty good podcast. And I was like, don't do that. Every comedian's got a podcast. Let's not be those people. And he said, let's just do one as a proof of concept. Let's just see if it works. Yeah. And so we just did the exact same thing that we usually do, which was sort of sit over a couple of beers and look at the New Yorker that week and look at the cartoons and then talk about our batch that we were going to pitch the following week. Yeah. And we just put a couple of mics in front of us and that was it. That was the show. That was like 2017, 18, I think. And it went pretty well. We obviously took a bit of a hiatus around the pandemic, but we're back. And Scott just had a kid, but we're still pushing through. So
yeah. Now, here's one thing that I've been wanting to ask you because I may just have misunderstood. Your partner, is he a writing partner? Does he do his own comics? Describe what his role in this is better for me, because I understand what you do. I'm not sure I got my head around how whether he's his own cartoonist. Yeah. How does that work?
Forgive me for sending your listeners to my Substack, but I wrote
we're going to do a lot of that today. Sure. Don't worry. There's going to be a lot of that.
I wrote a big thing about the fact that for about 15, 16-ish years of being a cartoonist, I've been a full-time cartoonist. I made my living as a cartoonist for 20 years this year.
Yeah.
And for 15 of those years, I was a solo. I did everything. Wrote the comic strip, drew the comic strip, colored everything. And same with my gag cartoons for the New Yorker and for Mad and for Esquire and all those publications. I would just do it myself, and it's great because you get to enjoy all the success and everything, all the good stuff, and you have to endure the rejection, the bottomless, endless rejection.
Yeah.
But after a while, after many years of sort of getting published, once you get published and you see your work in a magazine or a newspaper, it's a great thrill. But there is a diminishing kind of return on it. There's sort of this hedonic adaptation thing that happens where you just sort of slowly becomes less thrilling every time.
Mm-hmm.
And there is definitely something to sharing the joys and like sort of travails of the cartooning life. And so Scott is so we're both stand-up comedians. Scott Dooley, he's an Australian, also in New York. We met over here. We didn't know each other in Australia. Yeah. We met at a karaoke bar in the East Village, like 2 in the morning.
What was he singing?
I couldn't tell you. I was so drunk. But yeah, we stumbled out of this. And I was like, "Well, you're Scott Dooley," and I had heard of him because he was on radio in Australia. He was doing like breakfast radio in Australia, and he had radio chops and I didn't, which is partly why the pod really works because he knows how to drive a show. But he also sort of, I think he has a sense of like what makes good, what people might want to hear on a show. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so he was doing stand-up in New York. So was I. We eventually crossed paths, and turns out we had the same sense of humor. He pitched a joke to me. I drew it up. I thought it was very funny. It was this guy. He was basically like a prisoner. The priest is standing by, ready to take him along the Green Mile, and there's a guard by the bars of the prison cell, and he's having his last meal, but he's taking an Instagram photo of it. That's how old this joke is. That's how old this joke is. But you remember when people used to take photos of their meals? Anyway, so I thought it was pretty funny. It's pretty dark. I pitched it to the cartoon editor at the New Yorker, and it got a yikes. And so really? I sent the original to Scott in the mail and said, great gag. It got a yikes. Which is a badge of pride. She's never said yikes before. And he was like, I think we may have something here. And so we sold it to Mad. And Mad bought it. It was great. But that's kind of where it all started. And after that, we just started catching up every Monday at a bar in the East Village called the Garret. And we'd just have beers and talk shop and come up with stand-up bits, basically. And then that sort of turned into, maybe this is a cartoon. Maybe this is for Ginger Meggs. Maybe this is for the comic strip. Maybe this is just a chunk. Maybe this could be a bit about things, but it would inevitably be prefaced with, is there something in this? Yeah. And years later, Jerry Seinfeld put out a book called Is This Something? Yeah. Which we took as a great affront to a creative genius of coming up with that title.
Well, I want to circle back around on this idea of working alone versus working with someone, because I'm actually finding the exact same thing as I, around my 25th year in cartooning, was that I had so much that I guess wanted to prove to myself, but also cartooning specifically requires that you just keep plugging away solo because the world doesn't yet believe in you, And so you kind of have to forge your own individualistic path. But like you, I felt that same sort of hedonic adaptation where I'm like, the joys aren't as high as they were when I first got into a newspaper or when I first got a nomination or this or that. And then you find like, there's incredible joy in the process of creating 100%. A comic or a thing, and working with someone and that bouncing back and forth of ideas. And also just the act of creativity is sort of sped up as soon as you bring in just one person, never mind a writer's room, one person immediately speeds things up.
Definitely.
And so do you find now in your creative path, are you happy that it happened when it happened, or would you wish that you would have done this sooner? Or how do you frame it in your mind in terms of reaching out and working with other people?
Yeah. I think, that's a really good question, because I did a daily comic strip for 16 years, and that's a very solitary life. Any comic strip cartoonist will tell you it's a one-man show, and every now and then you can farm out, you get a Jerry Scott and Jim Borgman situation, or a Jerry Scott and Rick Kirkman situation where, there's a writer and an artist and they collaborate on the writing. And, maybe you have a colorist or something, but really it's a very solitary, for the most part, it's a very solitary job. And I'm, believe it or not, I know I do stand up and a podcast, but I am very much an introvert. I'd like to sort of let the work speak for me instead of having to do it myself.
Of course,
but it's interesting to me that it was an accident. Like, I didn't go looking for a writing partner. In fact, I thought there was a stigma. I remember Sam Gross, we were in the cartoon lounge at the New Yorker, and Sam, every Tuesday the cartoonists would all huddle around and compare batches of cartoons and talk shop. And Sam Gross, I had 57,621 cartoons. And I wrote every one of them. And he glared at me. He just glared. I love Sam to death. And he had a real, I think it was the singer-songwriter era of the New Yorker.
Yeah.
Which it wasn't always like that. Writers used to always have, I say always, very often they would have gag writers, and they would give the cartoonists, the artists, the gags, and they would draw them up. Like, they didn't write the jokes originally. Long time ago. Some did. So you would give someone like Peter Arno a batch of gags and he would draw them up, and that would be the cartoon, and they would be called picture ideas, I think, in the contract. Anyway.
Oh, wow. All right.
Yeah, there's still in the contract when you sign with the New Yorker, it still says picture ideas, I think.
It says picture ideas? The New Yorker charging into the future with phrases from 1910. That's great. Okay.
Yeah, they really got the lawyers to really give it the good old polish.
Yeah, that's right.
They really know how to suck the joy out of
yeah, but in
creative
contrast
process.
to that, like, I grew up, and maybe you grew up in a similar world where, for me, the pinnacle of what a cartoonist could be was Schultz, and Schultz made it so publicly known that he wrote every single one and drew every single one, and he was going to die at his desk, which he did, in terms of the individual effort of it all. And so when I was a kid, that's what I wanted too, which was I wanted to be the sole voice of every cartoon I ever made, because I thought that's what Schultz did and that's what I had to do.
I thought you meant you didn't want a 401k. Okay.
That too.
Yeah, I don't need this dental work done. So, but like you, I sort of fell into it first with podcasting, and then from podcasting, sort of Brad and I saying, well, what if we pitched our ideas to one another in real time and worked on them, and then finding tremendous joy in this, and then realizing, oh, this is why my wife does TV writing. It's so fun to work on an idea with people that you respect and that you feel safe with in terms of joking around.
Yeah.
And you
develop a shorthand.
Yeah, and so part of me asking was I don't wish that I could go back in time, but I'm very grateful that I found this at some point in my creative life to work not just solo, but to bring in other people into any creative part of the process. It's just a joy,
Yeah, I think the timing, to answer your question, the timing of it was actually pretty perfect, because I was kind of hitting this point where I was, I guess, wondering, like, where does this go? I was doing stand-up at Dangerfield, and there was a guy called Ryan Reese. He's a comedian. He was about to go on right before me, and he was talking to me about, big picture stuff. And he said, as far as comedy goes, stand-up comedy goes, he goes, have you ever written with other people? I'm like, yeah. I every now and then I'll bounce a bit off another comic, because similar to cartooning, if you find someone who has a similar sense of humor or frames of reference or comedic sort of pedigree as far as like what they find funny, you can, it's a very fast way to develop material and sort of make it stronger. Some of the best tags I've ever got from my material have been from other comics. And vice versa. I think some of the best stuff I've ever come up with is tags for other people's material. Right. And you sort of give them away you just put them into the ether and hope that, something comes back one day. Yeah. But Ryan was saying, how many people do you know in their 70s still doing this? And I was like, I think I can count maybe 3 on one hand. He goes, all right, how about in the 60s? And I was like, maybe 7 or 8. He goes, all right, 50s. How many guys in their 50s do you know are getting up night after night, New York City, stand up? I'm like, Bill Burr, Bobby Kelly. I'm like, yeah, maybe 18 on a regular basis. He's like, yeah. He goes, what are you doing? Where does this end for you?
Yeah.
And I was like, I've never asked that question.
Wow,
And the reason I've never asked that question is one, out of total sheer terror. The other one, just existential dread. But also just because my reason for doing it was, there was never any destination for me, which was kind of weird. A lot of other people wanted to get a late night show or a sitcom or say a late night show. They wanted to get a late night spot so they could tour.
Right.
Or they wanted to get like a movie, they wanted to get into movies or TV or acting or whatever it was. There was some kind, it was a gateway to something else. And I was like, no, I just like doing the thing. I just like the thing I'm doing while I'm doing it. I never really thought of it as a means to an end, which was, he said is, well, that's a mistake, because he said, you know, you should probably have something in mind. I was like, oh, whatever comes up, you know. And then with cartooning, because, you know, things did come up. I was in commercials and TV and stuff like that.
Sure.
But that was never the reason I was doing stand-up. But then, like, with cartooning, I thought, I've never asked myself that either. I just like cartooning. It's my favorite thing to do. Right. It's all I can do, really, is writing jokes and drawing them, or maybe performing them. And it's sort of like, I guess that's just, I do it because I like doing it. And so when you find someone else who has that, who has like the love, the joy of the process of like finding a bit and going, oh, let's squeeze this and see what comes out. Like it's just, or just punching up an idea, and the joy of like a writer's room, people one-upping each other with ideas and jokes and tags. There's something infectious about that energy. And yeah, I think you're right. There's something about, it's right place, right time, right person. And Scott and I, because we both grew up in Australia, we have the same comedic references. So we're not constantly going, oh, before I pitch this to you, there's this thing, but you know, it's just, we know we have the same points of reference.
Yep.
There's a shorthand.
Absolutely. So one thing I got to say, because you did mention it, doing stand-up at Dangerfields, I've been following you on Substack, and you've written a couple times on your Substack. And I not to turn this into like a big, smoochy session, but you're also a really good writer. You're also,
oh wow, really,
you're very
genuinely
good.
no. It's
You're
my
very
least
good.
favorite. It's the one thing I'm just terrified of sharing. I think I'm a dreadful writer.
I pour over your writing, and part of it, I mean, you're very good. Part of it is you're living my fantasy of doing stand up, and Dangerfield being one of my touchstone comedy figures. Just the fact that you've been backstage, you've been in that area. It really is, you're living the dream. I told you at the beginning of the show I was going to spend a lot of time living vicariously through you. But what's that like, getting up there on that stage, knowing that so many amazing performers, including yourself, have been up there? What's that feeling like?
Well, okay, so I'll tell you, but there's a sad bit that I'm about to tell you, but rest assured, at the end, there's a happy end.
Okay, all right, I'll stick with it.
Just so you don't think I'm a complete downer. Yeah. So Dangerfields was my home club, and what that means is once you get passed, and being passed is basically like you become one of the regulars at the club. You put in avails at the start of the week, and then they tell you, hey, you're doing the Monday 7 and 9, you're doing the Wednesday, you're doing the Friday 7, 9, Saturday 7, 9, Sunday 7. You sort of, you just know which spots you're doing in which clubs. And so, you know, you'll get passed at a few different clubs around the city, and then they'll put you up on, you know, and you sort of race around town doing spots. You'll do 10, 15 here. At Dangerfields, I did like 25 every night because, it was just, they would book less comics. They just had like maybe 4, sometimes 5 comics on a show. Wow. And it's like a 90-minute show. And, you do like 25 minutes, and that was really nice because that's the place that became my home club.
Can I get real specific on that? So you're doing 25 minutes, and then you get off stage, you have a quick water or vodka and soda at the bar, and then do you get on the A train and rush over to the next club? Is that literally what you're doing?
Yeah, and because Dangerfields was on 61st and 1st, it wasn't near any subway stop, so you'd have to flag a cab or get an Uber or run. To 14th Street, to Lexington. So it was one of those things where I was on a Saturday night, on Friday and Saturday night, I was just a mad mess, especially in summer when there's tourists everywhere.
Yeah.
Everyone's in the way, I'm
and
sprinting
New York
on the sidewalk.
summer, not the coolest nights necessarily.
Certainly not. And not in Dangerfield, which is the world's oldest comedy club. Rodney Dangerfield opened it in the 1960s because every other club was a music club that did comedy. Or a strip club that did comedy. So what it was is basically like, you had, Jay Leno or someone like that opening for musicians, or opening literally being the only thing between the audience and seeing some boobies. That was, he had to do comedy to open for strippers. And then Dangerfield was like, we ought to have our own club. And so he opened the club, then the comic strip opened, and he had all these other clubs popping up like Caroline's and now closed Boston Comedy Club. New York Comedy Club eventually came along many years later, The Stand, and of course the Comedy Cellar, which is the best comedy club in the world, and definitely my spiritual home in New York. And so Dangerfield sort of became this, over time, every great comedian performed there, and it just became this touchstone of like, oh, you've sort of got to pass through Dangerfield as a portal to whatever. And so, I lived on the East Side. So I would often get phone calls from the manager at the last second saying, hey, we had a dropout, quick, jump in a cab. At like, 10 o'clock at night. And
what a great life. What an amazing burst just to pick up the phone. Okay, I'm going to be on stage in an hour. Yeah.
Oh, and it was phones, by the way. There was no texting. It was telephone calls and checks. They pay you in check. It's $50 for a spot on a weekday, or sometimes $25 depending on what you did, and then $100 I think on the weekend, and they'd pay you with a check. Rodney Dangerfield Inc. was on the check, and I kept my first one.
You bet your boots you did, yeah.
And it was a nice throwback to that old time in New York when comics would get up and they'd wear a jacket or something, and they'd tell jokes. Unfortunately, what happened was, Dangerfield's, with all of its character and history, in 2020, like everywhere else, in March of 2020, it closed. And soon after, it just said, we're done. We're closed. After 60 years or whatever it was, we're done. We're closed. Thanks for the memories. The waiter who had worked there since 1969 or 71 or something, Chario, the Greek waiter, he used to get up and tell jokes sometimes, very off-color jokes sometimes. Yeah. Unfortunately, he died, and it kind of just was like, all right, well, that's the end of an era. That's the closing of a chapter in comedy history, and especially in New York. And then end of last year, I caught wind that someone wanted to buy the building, and I always thought, like, who would buy something like that? Because the last time anyone saw it in any sort of glamour was in the movie The Joker with Joaquin Phoenix. He gets up after, I think Sam Morril is on stage, and then Joaquin Phoenix gets up and just freaks the audience out, and it's that dimly lit, red lampshades, it's a real, like, velvet walls. Anyway, someone bought it, and then they've just reopened it under new management, and they're calling it Rodney's as a nod to Dangerfield's, but also they don't have to pay the licensing fee on the name.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but Rodney's is now open on 61st and 1st. So happy ending.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on Comic Lab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
Now, we want to talk to you about some of the stuff that you're doing on Substack. And first question, how many different Substacks do you own? Because I know just from following you, there's New York Cartoons, there's Process Junkie, there's something called Toon Stack, which seems to be you and a lot of other New Yorker cartoonists. How many different Substacks do you own?
So 3 is the answer, but Toonstack isn't one of them. Toonstack is think of it like a co-op. It's basically a bunch of New Yorker cartoonists who got together and started to, I think it might have been Sophia Warren and Amy Kurzweil and Hillary Campbell, Ellis Rosen, Jason Katzenstein, Kendra Allenby, and I'm probably forgetting 1 or 2 people who kind of actually threw around the idea, because we used to actually go into the New Yorker every Tuesday to pitch to the cartoon editor. Unfortunately, after 2020, that no longer happens.
Right.
And so we kind of just made our own cartoon hangout, get together, whatever. And I think the idea came up at some point where we were like, well, each of us have our individual mailing lists on MailChimp, and we have social media, and we have some had a lot of Instagram, some people had Patreon, some people had MailChimp and whatever. So we thought, what if we kind of do a bit of a collab and maybe cross-pollinate, because people who are interested in, A, cartoonists' work might also like B, cartoonists' work. And we're always doing that kind of thing where we're trying to, lift everyone up at the same time. Because it's, as competitive as the New Yorker is, cartoonists themselves, I mean, we're pretty supportive people generally. Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty nice, industry to be in. So Toonstack started out as just like hey, let's put out a Substack. And this is when Substack was not really a thing. People weren't really on Substack. You had a Substack, but it was like, what is that? And then it was like maybe 5 or 6 cartoons per issue. And what we would do is try and give a bit of personality. So there'd be a paragraph about the cartoon or about the topic from the cartoonist written, and then the cartoon. And initially it was just sending it out for free, just sending it to people. They would subscribe, they'd sign up, and they'd sort of share it. And that was kind of the idea, is that it was a shareable. And about the same time, I was talking to Nick Anderson, who was starting Counterpoint. And this is before Counterpoint was on Substack. And it was a similar idea of what if a bunch of cartoonists from different backgrounds and styles and political, everything, just all sent out their stuff on one email. Right. So that within something at the smorgasbord, maybe you just like the scrambled eggs. Yeah. But maybe you also like sausages and bacon. But, it just sort of it felt like a nice way to give people the Amazon thing of other people who purchased this also liked this, Yeah. So it started to gain a bit of steam, and then we realized it was a lot of work to do. It was a lot of work to as it's like herding cats, organizing cartoonists. It's a lot.
That was the first thing on my mind. Absolutely. Who organizes that? Yeah.
Right. And the solution to that problem was a circulating roster of editors. So each week we have a different cartoonist sort of guest editing, as it were. And we have access to the Substack account, and we will basically put together a topic. We'll come up with a topic, and then we'll basically reach out to the cartoonists we want to reach out to. We always try and bring new people in instead of it being the same cartoonist every single time. Or people from different sort of backgrounds and styles. And again, just try and introduce people to cartoons they may never have seen, because Instagram, for whatever reason, is suppressing their posts, or they wouldn't usually see them, or maybe they don't subscribe to the New Yorker or Mad or whatever. So it was one of those things where I guess it just took on a bit of a life of its own. And then Cartoon Stock, which is now, it was Cartoon Collections at the time, but it's now merged with Cartoon Stock, which is Bob Mankoff and Joel Mission and the gang over there in the UK. They went, hey, why don't you also do Toonstock to our people? So Toonstock also goes out through the Cartoon Stock mailing list every week as well. And so we we do a mirror, it's a mirror mailing list. So we send one through Cartoon Stock through their portal, online portal, and then we have one that goes out through Substack. It's still called Toonstack on both things. But but they're separate mailing lists with the same cartoons. The key to it was initially monetization was not the aim. Similar to Counterpoint in a way that we're let's just build an audience first and then talk later about whatever.
Yeah.
So what we did was every cartoon that goes up, we upload it to Cartoon Stock as well. So if people want to license the cartoon, first of all, there's a share button under every cartoon, but there's also a license button. So if you want to download it, if you want to buy it, you want to use it in your newsletter, you want to use it in whatever, you want to print it, you want a framed print of it, you want it on your shower curtain, whatever you want this cartoon in whatever format, there's just one button under each cartoon if it really tickles you. And that's the monetization. It's not a collective paid subscription that we split 10 ways or whatever,
Right.
which gets very messy. It's more of a, hey, if someone likes your cartoon and they click it, you get the money. That's the whole thing. And then the editor gets paid each week as well, which is nice.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
There's a lot of work.
I love this for so many reasons, and the main one being is that, and I don't want to speak for you, but I feel like there is a generally accepted notion amongst most cartoonists and artists that share things on social media that if it is not broken, it is breaking, in the sense that, yes, you can still build an audience, you can still build a very large audience, but trying to actualize them in any way, not even necessarily monetize them, but just trying to get them to do anything that involves linking off of whatever social media you're on, immediately triggers an algorithm that like lowers or governs how many people are going to see it.
That's right. It buries it.
Because they are literally spending hundreds of millions to keep you on the platform. The last thing they want to do is encourage people jumping off.
Right.
So, what I love about this Substack is that, to me, because Brad and I have been struggling with this for months now, maybe for a couple of years now, on like, what is the next thing? And we've had this a couple times in our career, and you've had this a couple times in your career.
More than a couple of times.
Which is, the model that you thought, well, all right, this is it. Newspapers. I'm going to do this. I'm 10 years in. There's no way I can't do this for 40 more years. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, God, this is all falling apart. And then, like, for Brad and I, it was the ad model. Oh, this is great. We're good for, this is working. I'm making great. Oh, God, it's all falling apart. And now it seems to be that the social media supported landscape for cartoonists is, again, if not broken, breaking. And I'm noticing it sincerely with my Patreons, with my Kickstarters, with book sales, with anything that I'm trying to do where I'm trying to move a reader. And what I love about Toonstack for you, and just in general, this idea of cartoonists coming together, is it's a recognition that we can, to some extent, be our own saviors in the problem, is that we all have our individual audiences. Let's figure out a way to steer one another towards one another. And so the rising tide will lift all boats.
Yes.
And as time has progressed and social media has broken, like as Twitter breaks into X and becomes unusable, have you guys had conversations around Toonstack about what it once was started to be and how you all are trying to envision what it could be now?
We try not to think too far into the future for that exact reason, because now that these cycles, these tech cycles, are becoming exponentially shorter. As you say, I started out in literally my first, when I was working as a printer, and then I worked in a newspaper room, like and the room would shake because of like it was an old newspaper room, and it smelt of ink and old stale pizza. And I had a J. Jonah Jameson style editor, Brian Mitchell. I was doing editorial cartoons. I was doing ads. I was doing layouts and copy editing and a lot of proofreading. I had sort of ink on the back of my irises when I went to sleep at night.
Yeah. I didn't know you were a newspaper guy too. That's amazing. That's something all three of us have.
You and Brad have similar paths. That's great. Yeah. Ink
in the veins. Yeah. I thought I was going to be a political cartoonist my whole career, because I saw those guys and I was like, well, that's been around for a long time, I guess. Yep. Your logic dictates, well, something that has been must continue to be, because that's all you know when you come into the world. You think, oh, this thing's been around forever. Of course this is going to be around forever. And then you look now, and I remember talking to Matt Bors about it at CXC years ago, when he was talking about the nib and the model there, and Ellery Harris as well. And we were talking about the fact that even that has a cycle. Like the fact that in the 2010s, we had these ad models that propped up, things like the nib, and we had print models and subscription models, and we had a Patreon, and we had this, and we were doing a print copy of the magazine and all this stuff. Right. And I really loved the nib. I thought it was fantastic. I always enjoyed the fact that I found artists contributing to the nib that I would never have heard of had I not been a subscriber. And it was from them that I learned, it's funny, Brad, you're like, you think I'm a thought leader. I'm just absorbing everything from everyone else. I'm just listening. I'm a listening leader. But that's what I'm just trying to hear what everyone else is doing and try and figure out, interpret it somehow. So to that end, at Toonstack, we're trying not to plan too far ahead because we just don't quite know that if we make a plan, that it is going to be feasible to carry it out because the road might vanish and drop beneath us.
Right.
And so, people who I know well who have made their full-time living paying their rent on Instagram, like selling their art, selling their merch on Instagram, overnight, having been shadow banned accidentally or having their account suppressed for some reason, having their posts go from, 16,000 views per day to 100 for no particular reason, for no evident sort of clear reason. And all of a sudden they just like, oh my God, what am I going to do? They used to get commissions through Instagram. They used to get, print requests and all sorts of stuff and collabs with brands, big brands. Now they're just sort of scrambling and panicking. And we have these conversations. And, I went to, speaking of CXC, which I love, which is Cartoon Crossroads Columbus, at the Billy Island Cartoon Museum and Library. I always go there every year because I think that's listening to people there is a pretty good way to learn about what the younger generation of cartoonists are doing to kind of make their way, because they're coming out of like SCAD and CalArts and RISD and SVA, and all these schools that are sort of, I wouldn't want to write the syllabus there because everything changes every 5 minutes.
Yeah, I know.
And so the cartoonists that on Toonstack, we trade notes all the time. And we think, hey, is this something? Could we maybe do a New Yorker thing where we draw at events? Can we do this? And I've been doing live caricatures for like nearly 18 years. And it's not it's a job that is, if you're good at it, great. If you don't like it, it's not a fun job. You've got to love it to do it.
Because not everybody looks at that caricature and thinks it looks like them. Larry David being one of those people, right?
I had that experience that you can read all about on my Substack. It is a subjective art form. So we all talk about, ideas that we might be able to do. We got invited, a bunch of us got invited to go to a burlesque show and live sketch. It was like a burlesque version of Alice in Wonderland, this big, crazy, opulent burlesque show in Brooklyn. And we're thinking, hey, maybe we could do this for events. Maybe a bunch of cartoonists could get together and do a live, and give the originals at the end. We could be paid to be there. And so we're always coming up with things that we might be able to do.
Although I can guarantee if someone's either has a choice of looking at a burlesque dancer or my sketches, I know where they're going to be looking at that moment on a live show.
Yeah, we realized that pretty quickly. And so what we decided, to pretend that the whole idea in the end was that they got to use the images for their socials to promote the show.
Oh, there you go.
There you go.
There you go.
And then mailing list, more importantly. But so to that point, we try not to make any hard plans. Someone will just throw something out in the chat and go, hey, it's like a big group chat. And we're sort of like, hey, what about this? This could be something. Maybe we try this. And everyone that's a good thing about cartoonists. We're pretty flexible and resilient. We kind of are able to kind of move with the tide, I guess, as things move.
Yeah, I actually think the water metaphor is good because we are mainly individuals. You can sort of flow like water around whatever the new problem was, whereas it's a little bit trickier for a syndicate, a publisher, a larger organization to be nimble and to make a move. That's the one thing that's been saving probably all three of us through really weird tectonic shifts in our career. Yeah. But one of the things that so to get back to my thought on this is that one of the reasons why I love this Toonstack model is that, it's people coming together, works together. And even if you don't have necessarily plans, you guys have the tools in your hands at the moment to to make a change if you want to. You're not waiting on an institution. The thing that I fear, and I'll just voice it because we all know it's true too anyway, with like Reddit is about to get demonstrably worse in the next 18 months, 24
listed,
months as it publicly lists, and then it has to answer to shareholders. And my fear with like a Substack or any model that like, or any platform that we could lean on, is that Substack has done what, like B share listings, B public offerings, but it hasn't done its IPO yet. No. As soon as it goes for that IPO, my fear is that all this wonderful stuff that you've built on Substack, following on all the wonderful stuff that we've built previously on Instagram or on Twitter or on Facebook or on MySpace or whatever we did before that. And so, but what's great though about what you're doing with TuneStack is you could, if you wanted to, it would cost money, but you transfer the whole thing over to MailChimp and you own it and you control it, so you've got that exportable mailing list, so to speak, from Substack now. Right. And that to me is sort of the brass ring, is that when you can, and God willing, they don't take this away when they do their IPO, but you can take that audience with you and leave Substack. And that seems to me something that we've never been able to do previously with Instagram or with Twitter or with Facebook, is suddenly say, okay, all 5,000 of us, or all 50,000, we're all going over here now. And so I know you're saying you're not planning, but have you talked about what would the next step be if Substack falls apart in an enshittification process?
Yeah, I did an entire talk about this exact topic at CXC last year. Oh,
yeah? Okay. I should have gone. See,
link in the show notes so you can find it on YouTube.
Good man.
It's basically, we absolutely talked about it. Because basically the one thing that I've always advocated, listen, I can't see around corners. I'm always listening out for what people are doing. The one thing I'm always aware of is that when you're on an Instagram or a Facebook or a Pinterest or a TikTok or a, remember Vine?
I remember.
You are renting space on someone else's lawn. You are you don't own those followers, and you certainly can't take them with you if you want to go somewhere else. And as you say, every time you try to, your posts get suppressed. Anytime I plug the pod or the Substack or anything really that isn't natively available on, say, Instagram or Facebook or whatever, it gets buried a lot. Sometimes it doesn't even get one like. It's hilariously shadow banned. So it's so pronounced these days. And as you say, when something is answerable, when an entity becomes answerable to shareholders, when dividends are the real driving force behind a platform rather than the actual content on that platform, it becomes bastardized, and you have to have the autonomy to take those people that you've spent sometimes years and years and years building and finding. I should say finding, not building, because they're not bricks. They're humans. They're people who like your things. And I've always advocated for, and I sound like a broken record. Maybe I said this on the last pod, but don't curate your art to what gets likes, curate it to what you like. Because, the trends come and go. And if a trend goes and you're stuck doing a thing that you don't really like to begin with, and you were just doing to get likes, you're going to be miserable. And the whole kind of idea that you find your people that like your thing, I think microfame is the best kind of fame you can have.
Oh, I love it. Yes, agreed.
Absolutely. Dave and I were talking about exactly that's the clearest way of saying something Dave and I have been talking about for weeks. And Reddit is a really great example of, you can see people actually who have been doing things clearly geared towards the likes. And then they keep doing that same thing over and over and over.
Who can blame them? Because they're trying to build a thing, but
it's very natural. But then when they try to pivot from that into monetization, nobody's interested, because they've got something that doesn't have any real soul to it. Nobody's going to buy a collection of that. But here's my question for you. Because we talked about earlier how you've got multiple Substacks. Yes. How much is Substack right now factoring into your immediate plans for the future in building your business, building a career for yourself, making money happen? How is Substack factoring into that immediate plans the next several years going forward?
Very much a huge proportion of it, and I'll tell you why. For the past 16 years, up until literally the day we did our last podcast, I received my last paycheck for the comic strip that I was doing for 16 years. It was a daily syndicated newspaper comic strip called Ginger Meggs. I paid my rent as a newspaper comic strip for 16 years.
Wow.
And so obviously, as I sort of noticed the writing was on the wall a while back, I was thinking I really do have to diversify and figure out how else I'm going to be able to make money. And in Australia, I was already doing that because you can't actually make a full-time living just doing one specialized thing there. There just aren't enough people. So, you do live caricatures and you do editorial cartoons and gag cartoons and a comic strip and commissions and just all kinds of stuff. But I did sort of look at that and think, but if you spread yourself that thin, you can't really specialize and get good at one thing, can you? You kind of have to, by definition, dilute every one of those skills in order that you do them as for work. So I decided at the end of last year I drew a picture of myself. This is very silly. I drew a picture of myself and I said, what even am I in the year 2023? What am I?
Yeah.
And there's all these things around me that kind of, it's almost like an anatomical drawing of, the arm and the liver and the head. So it's like, am I a comedian? Am I a writer? Am I a comic strip cartoonist? Am I an illustrator? Am I a gag cartoonist? Am I a podcaster? Am I a writer? So what I did was I just listed every single thing. And then I just started basically cutting away and crossing out things and going, I'm going to have to say goodbye to that. And I'm going to have to say goodbye to that. I'm going to stop being that. I'm going to stop being that.
Right.
So I left my agent. I don't do acting anymore. I left my advertising agent. I don't do ad work anymore, which is probably good timing because they're starting to use AI anyway. And then there are a bunch of things that I just sort of cut out so that I could double down and focus on the one thing that I actually bound out of bed in the morning to do. I love it, and that is Substack. And the reason is it could be anything. Substack is just it is what it is. And as you say, Dave, there's always that thing in the back of your head that's like, but what if they IPO? What are they going to be like when they IPO?
Yeah.
I know Hamish, who's one of the co-founders, is a New Zealander, in fact, and we've met in New York a bunch of times. I've done a bunch of Substack events in New York. They are a very people-first organization. And by that, I mean, it's not just hyperbole and what everyone says when they're like, we're really about our people, we're a family. They hate that. They hate even using the term family. But what they really realize is that the value of Substack isn't in necessarily the platform itself. The platform is an empty spaceship without the writers and their readers. A great example of that is The New Yorker, in another insane move, in a litany of terrible moves, fired Andy Borowitz at the end of last year, one of their best writers.
I saw that.
And so I emailed Substack. I said, you guys have to get onto this because he has 1 million followers on Facebook, millions of followers on Instagram. He has millions of readers over the year that he's collected over decades of writing satire for The New Yorker, political satire. He's a brilliant, hilarious writer here in New York. And so they did. They got him. And he has now amassed this gigantic subscribership of people who pay him directly. They don't pay Condé Nast. They don't pay some other syndicate. They pay him into his pocket for the writing that he does that he's good at. And I look at that and think, well, look, if something happens and Substack gets bought or absorbed by a Google or an Apple or whatever the hell, you're probably going to have to reassess. And there was a bit of a stress test last year. I don't know if you listened to Hard Fork, but Casey Newton sort of jumped ship from Substack. Bit of a complex thing there because it wasn't totally honest journalism, wasn't honest reporting on that. They did have a bit of a stress test on their ethos and on their moderation and things like that. But they really stuck to their founding sort of foundational principles. And that upset a lot of people. A lot of people were like, no, you should change. You should absolutely modify them. And then when they actually dug into it, they're like, we also agree. We don't like this kind of content. And that's why we've deleted it. And that's why it's gone. But we're not going to change our charter because of the winds changing. Like they're very much about letting writers write what they want to write and not curating it to a preordained sort of, no, these are the only things you can write about and these are the only things you can use. It's got moderation. Every platform has moderation issues. If people do have sort of a motivation that they're like, I just can't be associated with Substack because of something a founder said or someone on staff said, great, you have the absolute right to grab those readers, those subscribers, and take them wherever you want. You can go to Constant Contact, you can go to MailChimp, you can go wherever you want, you can go to Patreon, you can go, you can do whatever you want. You don't have to be on Substack. It happens to be a very good model for me because the way that it propagates, sort of the way that it sort of shows people things is based on what they're reading. And I like people who have the patience to read. These are my people. People who read comics, people who read cartoons, and people who like to read writing that isn't clickbait, that isn't designed to just grab your attention and then grab you in the face and yell at you. It's sort of thoughtfully, quietly written stuff, because that's what I like reading. I write what I like to read. And then basically they have features that you can opt in or out of. You don't have to use Notes, which is basically Twitter without the Nazis. It's basically like they have features, they have DMs, they have podcasts, as you know. They have, and that's what, is there something in this? We moved that from another platform to Substack, and it's been great. And people are finding it through Substack, through the Substack recommendation model. Right. Which I really like, because I don't like doing all that stuff. I don't like doing recommendations and worrying about payments and all that crap. And look, I don't work for Substack. I certainly don't work for Substack, but I do think they've found the marriage between MailChimp, Medium, and Patreon, and they've mushed it together into this one thing where creators can just get on with the work of making work. I mean, Brad has been slowly, I don't know if convincing is the right word, but selling me on the idea that Substack might be a place for me to go. In the same way that I'm sure longtime listeners to Brad and I on podcasts would remember that 10 years ago, Brad and Scott and Chris were like, you should try this Twitter thing. Like, there's something to this, back when it was fun and interesting. And I agree with both of you that Substack is at the moment an amazing platform that with the tools that it has. I guess what a part of it is, I'm sort of having an adult realization that about every 3 to 5 years now, for the rest of my life online, I'm going to have to switch my affiliation of platforms of like, as they go from like, because I'm old enough to remember when Larry and Sergey were like, Google's core slogan is going to be do not be evil. Right. Do not be evil. And they were even briefly considered registering not as a for-profit company, but as, I mean, it was very brief, but they considered for a briefest window. Right. So we have this model again and again and again of even people that start the most altruistic platforms, or not even altruistic, but like leaning towards good platforms. And unfortunately, the capitalist model for all of them, and I'm not anti-capitalist, I'm just saying the capitalist model for all of them, as they go towards IPO, it becomes, as Cory Doctorow said, first it's about the users, then it's about the advertisers, and then it's about the shareholders. He's right.
And so the one key thing that I think that I'm very sparking on with Substack is the idea that as they go through that enshittification process, I can take my email list from Substack to whatever next platform that is. My fear would be that I would spend 5 years building on Substack, and then some future CEO right before the IPO goes, all right, email downloads are frozen. You can no longer take the emails. And we're like, what? Wait a minute. But we've seen sudden changes like that with all sorts of platforms. You know what I mean? We have,
which is an argument for my monthly reminder in my phone, which is, download a backup of your subscribers.
Say
Brad,
that again.
Brad does the same damn thing. That's so funny.
And we were talking about this last night, and I said, Dave, if you're worried about this, you could set a reminder.
Literally, Brad said that less than 24 hours ago to me. He's like, you know what? You just set a reminder every month. Download your list.
That's what I do.
And but I mean, part of this is, and this is just me sort of wailing and gnashing my teeth publicly, is just the sadness that every 3 to 5 years we're going to have to go through this cycle of, hey, try out this thing called Twitter. It's fun. Oh, wait, now it's Nazis. Hey, try out this thing called Instagram. It's fun. Oh, wait, now it's bought by Facebook. Oh, hey, try out, whatever the platform
TikTok.
is.
Oh, it's been.
Yeah. So it's just, it's the dawning awareness sort of in adulthood that like you said at the very beginning, you do not own these platforms. You are at best renting space on someone's lawn.
That's right.
If not even worse, being a tool towards someone else building their house.
Oh, you're watering the garden. Yeah, no doubt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, absolutely, I feel like it's just like I said, it's just a public wailing and gnashing of teeth that we're now living in this eternal future of every 3 to 5 years we're going to have to switch platforms again.
Oh, and it goes beyond that, too. As we're recording this show, Canva just announced that they were buying Affinity. So all of those Affinity products that people bought because they didn't like having to pay a subscription at Adobe, if you have any question in your mind why Canva bought them, it wasn't to keep giving you cheap, affordable software. Wow. They are going to start, as of today, their long, steady march towards having a similar Adobe-based subscription model. There's no question. There's no other reason for them to buy it. But listen, as we're winding down today, I wanted to bring up one more thing. I'm going to bring it back to the New Yorker because, again, I'm one of those guys that, same as you, I started out wanting to do political cartoons. That I found out very quickly as politics changed, I didn't have the heart for it. For about 5 minutes, I harbored the illusion of being a New Yorker cartoonist. I have no illusion. Speaking of illusions, I have no illusions that that's me. But in the interest of living vicariously through you a little bit more, talk to me about the daily, which is something you get up in the morning, you read the paper, or you don't read the paper, old man Geiger.
You've already.
Christ, I just burned
You lost
up.
the thread. You ring the bell for your butler to come in with the daily paper.
It's the opening scene from How to Murder Your Wife. That's basically my life.
Yes, you're in your mansion. Yeah.
But then you basically pitch cartoon ideas to the New Yorker for them to use on their website. And then you've got to get this thing done in mere hours, right? It's almost a morning improv. Talk to me about that.
So the daily is the cartoon that only ever runs on their social media and website and newsletter. So in fact, I would argue that more people see that cartoon than the magazine cartoons. You get paid way more for the magazine cartoons and royalties, but for some reason, I guess less people buy the magazine now or have a subscription to the magazine. More people subscribe to the humor newsletter, which is free, and they follow the New Yorker cartoons on Instagram. There's a New Yorker cartoons dedicated account, and on Facebook, the comment section is a garbage fire, of course. But it is kind of let's call it a horrific example of cartoonists forced to do spec work for an organization that should probably be able to afford a retainer for some people. But what it used to be was, for the longest time, it was they would pay one cartoonist like David Cypress or Pat Burns or someone to do a cartoon every day on a topic du jour, whatever the news story was. A bridge collapses. Right. All right, we're going to somehow do a cartoon about infrastructure. The thing about it is there's a bunch of cartoonists who have been asked by the New Yorker directly, hey, submit every morning by like 9 a.m. latest. Read the news, look at the ideas of the news of the day, pitch us pencils, like roughs of some cartoons that you might like to, about the stories of the day, and they'll get back to you by about 10-ish, 10:30, and you got to turn it in by, at the absolute latest, like noon. That's like real on the buzzer, noon. And then they put it up on the website, they put it on the newsletter that afternoon, they also put it on their socials. And because it's so ephemeral, it is very much like whatever the cultural touchstone is. The problem with it, there's two problems with it as far as I see it. And I've been doing the daily for a while. Scott and I constantly, we have a WhatsApp back and forth with ideas every morning. Is this a daily, based on March Madness or whatever it is that day? It's that sometimes the news cycle is so fast that the story you've elected to do a cartoon on, by the time they've decided, hey, yes, go with this one, the story is dead in the water, or something happened, or now Trump is saying that he doesn't have $500 million. Or, so it kills the gag. The idea all of a sudden doesn't work because the information has changed in the story. It is, and that's always been the danger of editorial cartoons in general, unless you really broaden it out in general.
But you're right, though. You used to at least have like 24 to 30 hours before the story sort of broke in a different way. You're right, yeah.
And in the days of an evening newspaper, like I grew up in a small city called Perth, and for years, Perth had a morning paper and an afternoon paper. The paper people read on the way to work and a paper they read on the way home. And, sometimes you could do a cartoon on the news of the day, and then it would run that afternoon in that afternoon's paper. But the news cycles have become smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, such that you've got to prick a pretty broad subject. And to that end, sometimes the New Yorker just has to do a cartoon on the weather. Because it's it's cold out. I guess, that's not going to change. So, hey, here's one about having to wear a jacket. It's hard. I don't envy them the job.
But that also perfectly encapsulates, and Brad and I have touched on this before on the show, but both he and I and you all started our first forays into the public sphere in editorial cartooning. Yes. And one of the reasons you've perfectly encapsulated it right there, is one of the reasons why I think, for better or for worse probably, editorial cartooning is dead as an art form, is that there is no way to continually monetize it. Like, it is virtual. Like, there is no more useless book to read than Best Editorial Cartoons of 2019.
Historically,
I have this book. Yeah, okay, great, but that's 4,000 historians worldwide are interested in that book, maybe at best. Sure. And so it's so hard. Like, it only worked in an advertising model that was continuously supported day in and day out. Yes. And as soon as we moved away from that, editorial cartooning just went poof, because nobody wants a book of 2 years ago editorial cartoons. Books are one of the big still money makers for cartooning.
It's a hard sell. It is a hard sell. And it's hard to argue with that. The only defense I will say in editorial cartooning is that I think Counterpoint is a very good model in that it's showing, if anything, the cartoons are showing points of view from both left and the right to the same audience. And I think that's the last place that those readers are seeing anything from the other side. They're just in their confirmation bias bubbles. Their algorithms are giving all the stuff that they like. And even if they follow other people they disagree with just to dunk on them, it's not the same, So in a way, the editorial cartoons at Counterpoint are kind of the last bastion of like, hey, here's the zeitgeisty thing, but here's how the left sees it, here's how the right sees it. I think when I was in high school, I remember probably the most enlightening things I read, and this is a shame, that the art form is kind of dying, is that the most enlightening things I read about World War II were the political cartoons. From Poland and from London and from the UK and America about what was happening, because we were reading articles about what the journalists were writing was happening. So they were saying what was happening. The cartoons were about what people thought about what was happening.
And what they felt.
They felt. Yeah. And that's a really different thing to capture in the zeitgeist.
Oh, absolutely.
Historically.
Absolutely.
And so those books, which I have those collections, are a pretty good thing to look back on, especially when you're on the verge of another hot war in Europe. You sort of look at them and go, this could run today. This is insane how cyclical these things are. And if there's any argument for a collection, it's that. It's like, hey, look, we keep making the same mistakes.
Oh, no. Listen, no, you're preaching to the choir in the sense that
I know that's not the argument you're making.
I did a whole useless master's degree on World War II propaganda. You are speaking to the exact right person in terms of my belief in how it can resonate down the centuries. But, what I'm saying, though, is that I just see that the model intrinsically broke. There are some people that are using it very well with Patreon, and by the way, good for them. All the better for it. I just think that your encapsulation of why sometimes the dailies for the New Yorker fall apart so quickly is an encapsulation in why, in general, editorial cartooning as a platform has fallen apart a little bit, I think. So anyway, that was the summary of that one.
Absolutely. Well, with that, before Dave starts into a lecture on Krukrunutsky, who was a 3-person Soviet editorial cartooning team. Did I get it right?
You actually did.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Deep cut there.
I just want to say, Jason Chatfield, thank you so much for being with us today. You are absolutely living your best life, and I will
chime in over Brad to say the one podcast Brad Geiger has ever recommended, as I said, is there something in this.substack.com. You're going to want to check that out. It is a dang delight. I was cartooning to it yesterday morning, no less. Is there something in this.substack.com? Or you're going to want to go to toonstack.substack.com for the full collection, the full conglomeration, the full grouping that I find such a delightful idea. Brad, what other URLs do we have to share with folks?
Dude, I'm telling you, and I mean this, New York cartoons.substack, really good writing. It's that kind of stuff that if you're me, you're up before the family, brewing your Saturday morning coffee, and you're sitting out on the porch, and you routinely come up with really good stuff to read. I'm telling you.
And just to complete that image, it's Brad with the coffee, everyone, on the porch, but pantless.
Totally pantless.
Yes,
don't worry, that's a given.
And reading NewYorkCartoons.com. That's Brad. That's our Brad right there.
I do it Dangerfield style.
That's right.
I've got the bathrobe
and a loosened
nothing
tie.
else. Just and also, by the way, it's got to be said, because I looked at this stuff now. If a lot of how to say this without being insulting, I previously resisted reading Ginger Meggs because it's like it's an Australian comic strip.
Yeah.
And so I didn't dig into it until just recently. Okay. Jason, the Bill Watterson quality that you brought to that
Let's not get carried away now.
I'm telling you, I read one. I read a Sunday strip that absolutely you were channeling your inner Bill Watterson. Good, solid gag writing and obviously top skills. If anyone was like me and was kind of Ginger Meggs, what do I care about Ginger Meggs? Honestly, some really good cartooning you did there. There's a lot to be proud of there. And
Thank you,
I mean that sincerely. I really enjoyed what I saw.
As someone with a signed Bill Watterson Let's Go Exploring Sunday strip on his wall, believe me, that hits very deep. Thank you.
That is the dang delight, by the way. And the last one that I will say, as a fellow lover of comics and how the sausage is made, I will point everybody to processjunkie.com. Jason's, how would you describe Process Junkie so that I don't get it wrong there?
Well, if New York Cartoons is the meal, Process Junkie is the kitchen. So the thing that goes out onto the table in the restaurant is New York Cartoons, but it's process-junkie.com. Basically, it's me showing you how did I get there? What did I use? What pens did I use? How did I come up with the idea? What software did I use? How did I scan it? What's the philosophy behind it? Which is, getting a little high-minded, so let's not go crazy. But I've been doing this long enough now that I realize everyone's process is so radically different. The creative process.
Bonkers different. Yeah.
And I want to kind of have a compendium of all of that, not just of my process, but like other cartoonists that I've spoken to, mainly cartoonists, but some comedians and writers. But yeah, I love, it's the one thing that I've never ceased kind of obsessing over is the process of making things. And so that's what that podcast, I didn't want to sort of cross-pollinate the New York Cartoons Substack with all of that, because it feels like some people just don't want to see how the sausage is made. They just want to eat sausage. So so Process Junkie is the back end and New York Cartoons is the front end.
Yeah, and to echo how wonderful that is as a contribution, it is so fun to see other people's process, because I, who think I'm so similar to Brad and we come from similar backgrounds, we have similar sense of humor, similar cultural references, sometimes when he or I get a peek into the other one's process, we're like, that is so bonkers different from how I do it. How does anything get done? That seems like such a weird process to me. And so, I can't recommend that enough. So that's fantastic. And in general, Jason, thank you for giving us way more than an hour of your time.
No, of course. I love it.
You
My favorite.
You are a gift to cartooning. Thank you for all that you do. And thank you for chatting with us today. It is a damn delight to talk to you.
It's been a pleasure, guys. I love doing this. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. We'll see you soon.
And with enormous thanks once again to our friend Jason Chatfield, I have the honor this week of saying that you've been listening to a much improved episode of Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my friend Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evilcomic.com.
And my close personal friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And I will tell you, because we're currently running on ProTips for those that are not Patreon backers, a 3-part special on Kickstarter. But I also want to say on behalf of Brad and I, how much we thank and appreciate everybody that jumped in on our Kickstarters as they were running. That genuinely means the world to us.
Yeah.
It is how the lights stay on around here. And so, honestly, you hear us talking things up all the time as projects go, but we also want to thank you after they're done. Thank you for your support. Thank you for the kindness. We're really proud of how the books came out. You're going to love them, and thank you, friends. And I will say the Comic Lab theme song is recorded with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net, and this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode. And remember, don't stop giving us those 5-star reviews over there on Spotify. You are helping us get this show out to a wider and wider audience, and that is fantastic. We love welcoming new members into our community, and you're helping to make that happen.
Absolutely. And on that note, I'm going to say Comic Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/Comic Lab. So I will go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/Comic Lab.
What would it take to get you to move to the East Coast, like a city like New York?
I'll tell you, my wife would love nothing more than to live in New York in our later years. And I would make to quote that old person at Emerald City Comic Con, I would make a go of it. I would have friends. I currently have 4 or 5 friends in New York, and I would make a go of the art scene and stuff. But to me, New York specifically always feels like it has just an eternal thin layer of slime on everything. Like something about that city does not feel clean to me. So that's my own, like no one else needs to have that subjective thought about New York. It's just me. For me, if I was going to move somewhere that had weather, it would be, I would move to London first, and then I would move to the East Coast. I don't know. Why do you ask? Just out of curiosity.
Oh, no, it's Carolyn and I have an ongoing conversation of how much we would love to get you to Philadelphia for like a 3-day or a 4-day weekend and take you to the farmers market and Reading Terminal Market and going out for cheesesteaks and walking and the neighborhood grocery that both of my sons work at now. And I've got this running bet in my head that after 4 days, I could turn you into an East Coaster.
See, now I got played once in my life by going to Notre Dame in the summer/fall when I was going to school there, and like, this is gorgeous. Oh, I could live here. This is going to be a great 4 years. And then a lake effect winter hit, and I was like, F this noise. I am out of here, and I'm never coming back. And so that's why at my age, I still live in Southern California, because I cannot emphasize to you how pleasant it is to live in Los Angeles with 70-degree weather all year round. It's just
every day.
There is no hassles to go out to get to my car. The trash can easily gets to the street. There's never snow. I don't even have to rake very much. I like palm trees. Los Angeles just has my heart, you know?
Oh, man. Well, maybe, the more you talk, maybe you're making me into a West Coaster. I don't know.
The way you could win my heart is with that cheesesteak. Just set me up with a good cheesesteak, and maybe I'll become a Philly man.
Yeah.